Coming up in a moment, 2 days after interim President Michel Kafando said he was back and in charge, it appears as though normalcy has been restored as Muslims in the country celebrate Eid. Then it's our last Friday of the month special, and we're looking at why domestic violence thrives in Nigeria despite the development in the country. And later on in our Africa Tech segment, we look at the relevance of research to national development. Hello and welcome to Network Africa on Channels Television with me, Cynthia Are. It's the last Friday of the month, and as is our culture, we will be looking at and analyzing an issue that might not necessarily be dominating the headlines, but is crucial nonetheless. But just before we get into that, let's get the latest from Burkina Faso. 1 week after a coup, normalcy does appear to have been restored in the country, 48 hours after President Michel Kafando assured his people that he was back and in charge. For the past 2 days, we've been communicating with the Voice of America's Emily Yob, and as of yesterday, she said things were quiet. Things appear to have stayed that way as Muslim faithful in the country are celebrating the Eid holiday like the rest of the world. But for more on what's happening right now, we go live to the capital of Burkina Faso, where Emily Yob of the Voice of America is standing by to fill us in on the present situation. Emily, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure as always. Now, could you just kindly fill us in what's happening as we speak?
Well, there are two important events happening today. This morning, the entire transitional government gathered for its first cabinet meeting since the coup, and the meeting has just finished a few minutes ago. The government was meant to discuss important issues such as the calendar for the next elections, as well as the dissolution of the RSP, the Tutsis group behind the coup. And this meeting was quite a symbolic event because it was during a cabinet meeting actually that the coup happened. And the other important event is the beginning of the dissolvement of the RSP.
Now, Emily, are elections going to hold as scheduled for the 11th of next month?
Probably not. The calendar was discussed by the transitional government today, but a new date hasn't been announced yet. A couple of days ago, Prime Minister Isaac Zira evoked the need for a delay of several weeks in order to fix technical issues. So it is very likely that the elections will not happen on October 11th as it was originally planned. So
you have no information on when it might be if things don't go that way on October the 11th?
It's probably going to be delayed. We don't know the date yet.
Okay. Now, just my final question. Supporters of the ousted president, Blaise Compaoré, were barred from contesting, in the elections, and that was what was said to have triggered the coup. Has that stance been reviewed, or does it still stand?
That stance still stands, and it will be left to the transitional government to decide whether the decree taken by the Constitutional Council should be reviewed or not.
Well, Emily, thank you very much for filling us in on the latest. We're grateful for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The Voice of America's Emily Yob reporting from Burkina Faso. Now, one of Ghana's 8 High Court judges caught on a video allegedly taking bribe has sought redress at the Supreme Court to halt impeachment process. Justice Paul Utaderi is seeking declaration that the petition filed by the Tiger Eye PI, that's a private company owned by Anas, calling for the removal of the dairy, is null and void. The High Court judge is claiming that the publication of the Tiger Eye's petition to President Mahama in the media, as well as the public screening of the evidence video at the Accra International Conference Center and the naming of the judges involved in the bribery scandal in a press release on September the 11th, 2015, actually contravene Article 146, Section 8 of the 1992 Republican Constitution and therefore remain unconstitutional. The bribery scandal video has been shown twice at the Accra International Conference Center for the public viewing on Tuesday and Wednesday, which were highly patronized by Ghanaians. Well, still to come on Network Africa. It's our last Friday of the month special, and we're looking at why domestic violence thrives in Nigeria despite the development in the country. And on that note, it's our last Friday of a month special. And what we're doing today is we're looking at why domestic violence still thrives in Nigeria. According to domesticviolence.com.ng, there are insufficient data on domestic violence in Nigeria, and this is primarily due to the stigma and silence surrounding the issue. Now, while there is not as much research as there should ideally be on such a serious social and public health issue due to the fear, shame and silence surrounding domestic violence, as well as limited funding to engage in the requisite research, there are clear data generated by reputable organizations. Just recently, the United Kingdom Aid Agency, that's DFID, and the British Council developed a report, Gender in Nigeria, back in 2012, which contains some of the more recent figures on aspects of domestic violence in the country. That study showed that domestic violence cuts across all socioeconomic and cultural backgrounds, and 28% of all women, almost a third of all women in Nigeria, have experienced physical violence. Now, we understand that some women actually feel that they deserve the treatment that they get. And based on the study which was carried out by the British, that's the United Kingdom Aid Agency and the British Council, there were some reasons which they were able to collate, particularly in rural areas. Now, what we saw was that some women justify the way they were treated for the above. For instance, burning food, arguing with their husbands, going out without asking permission, neglecting their children, and refusal to have sexual intercourse. Now, still based on that study, there are also reasons why women are said to stay in abusive relationships, and that's due to the fact that they need financial support, in that they're not independent, so they tolerate the treatment which they get in those abusive relationships for fear of losing that financial support. There's also lack of academic education, in that they're not properly informed and go ahead to tolerate those situations which they could actually have the opportunity of getting out of. Also, they're also afraid of complications of getting remarried. So they'd rather stick to the husband or the wife in the event that it's a man who's been abused. They'd rather stick to that person who's abusing them than to venture out into the wild and look for someone else. Another thing which makes women in particular stay in abusive relationships is when they have issues with their self-image. That is when they think that they deserve the treatment which they get and stay in those relationships. And one major reason which most women in Nigeria stay in abusive relationships is because of the children which they have with their partner.